In this video, I'll be testing 10 of the most popular ultra high performance tyres on the market to find out exactly which tyre is best for your sports car. As always, I'm going to deep dive into all the performance qualities of the tyres in the dry and the wet to tell you exactly which tyre is the fastest, which is the most fun to drive. I'm also going to look at important things for the real world, such as rolling resistance, comfort, braking and aquaplaning. Should be a really fun test. This BMW Supra should be a nice car to test with. So let's go find out what happens with these 10 tyres.
On test, we have the latest and greatest ultra-high performance tyres from the premium manufacturers, including the world's first test of the brand new Continental SportContact 7, some of the popular mid-range brands such as Federal, Kumho, Toyo and Nankang, and the cheapest set of tyres I could find online for the Supra, a combination of a Star Performer front tyre and Good Ride rear.
This has been a very interesting day of wet testing. Before I start, I want to remind you again that this BMW Supra is mixed fitment. That means the rear tyres are wider than the front. Why is this important? Well, on a car like this with really torquey power delivery and a rear diff that seems to want to lock up at the slightest hint of throttle, your front rear balance is really key to getting a good lap time here, because what you don't want is a car that's oversteering or understeering a lot. And with mixed fitment, sometimes that can be the case. Now, the slowest tyres on test were not, surprisingly to me, the mixed budget group. It was the Federal, and this Federal was the only tyre above 100 seconds. Now, there was essentially no redeeming features of the Federal. I couldn't find something positive about it. It wasn't even one of those tyres that you're like, okay, it's got low grip, but at least you have fun sideways. It was really bad sideways because when it was sliding, you had no ability to recover it. So it would go sideways on its own, and then you'd just be sliding and sliding. And sometimes it'd be the rear, sometimes it'd be the front, and you just didn't have the ability to predict where the car was going. And it just don't fit this if you want to drive in the wet. The next set of tyres, 3 seconds on, was the mixed group, the Star Performer and the Good Ride. Now, the Star Performer has been in previous tests, and I know from previous testing, it's very rarely actually the star of the test. And the Star Performer on the front axle was the weakest link. The Good Ride was actually okay. It offered reasonable traction out of corner. And with the Star Performer on the front, you could call the balance safe, because often car manufacturers like to put understeer in their car because they think it's safer. But it's only safer if the car actually turns, and with these tyres on, it really didn't. So another one to avoid. Goodyear was surprisingly next. Now, this is a tyre that struggled with this mixed fitment. Its front end felt sharp and pointy, it felt sporty, it was nice, and the braking felt okay. It didn't feel like it was the best of the group, but I'll do wet braking after this, but it felt okay. Where it struggled was the rear tyre. I'm not sure if it was aquaplaning, it didn't feel like it. As I was testing blind, and at that point I didn't know what I was driving on, I wrote down this could be the mixed fitment, such was the grip imbalance of the front and rear axle. So a little bit odd from the Goodyear. It normally brings it back on the dry, so let's find out if it does a bit later on. Kumho was next. Now, initially this tyre felt okay, the steering felt okay, it felt a little bit sporty. Didn't feel like it had the most amount of grip, but it was relatively balanced, so you could just start to push on a little bit. But the issue was once you overstepped the limit of the grip, especially at the rear, once it started sliding, it took a long time to recover, and that's not that fun. Redstein was next up the road. Now, this was another tyre like the Goodyear that just didn't want to grip at the rear. Both these tyres just seem to decide to oversteer at will. Like if you were trail braking into a corner, you can understand it, or if you're a little bit happy with the throttle like that on the way out, you can forgive it. At some point, you'd just be mid-corner like this, and the rear would just come around, but like violently. Very strange, these two. Bad balance. Maybe if it was a square setup and we were just using the front sides, they'd perform better, but in this test, in the wet, perhaps not the tyres to fit. Toyo was 5th. Now, this was the first tyre that I felt like I was actually driving rather than constantly managing some sort of situation. You could place the car easily, it was forgiving. When it started sliding, it was nice, and you felt like you were part of the journey, which was really nice, that I haven't had with any of the other tyres up until that point. It's negative, it just didn't have the most grip, but the grip was friendly, so quite a good upgrade for the Toyo Proxy Sport A, as this one is. The surprise of this test for me, when going through the data after to work out what was what, Nankang came 4th. And it wasn't even like a surprise 4th. It was 3 very consistent laps to get it a lovely 4th place. Where was this tyre strong? Well, it wasn't really the grip, it was how friendly it was. It was like driving a nice warm bath, which is a bit of a weird analogy, but you just felt like you could push on. It had no problems at any point, there was no surprises, and it was just like a friendly thing. So well done Nankang for that respectable 4th place in wet handling. I'm genuinely really impressed considering it is one of the cheaper tyres on test. Michelin, the Pilot Sport 4S, was 3rd. Now this tyre, it was another Goodyear in Vredstein. It felt exceptional on the front axle. I expect this to do very well in wet braking. But again, trying to do anything mid-corner, corner entry trail braking, corner exit throttle, you're just getting oversteer, and that's difficult to manage because it means you're not accelerating. When you're oversteering, unless you're trying to drift it, which I wasn't, it's not the quickest way around the lap, you're just not accelerating. So that's where the Michelin lost time. In 2nd place, significantly ahead of the Michelin, was the Bridgestone Potenza Sport, having another very good wet performance. This tyre, like in previous tests, has felt like it's a tyre that likes to be hustled around. It likes a bit of temperature and it likes to make you work for it, which perhaps isn't the best quality in a road tyre, but it is fast, the grip is outstanding, and it's entertaining. I enjoy it. The steering feels quick and precise. The balance was actually really good, even though it felt like it was a bit flighty. You could power it around a little bit. And as always with the Bridgestone tyre, it just felt meaty. So congratulations again to Bridgestone for your continued excellent performance in the wet. However, you will notice I have not mentioned the new tyre. And it is the newest tyre on test, at least a year newer than the Bridgestone, and probably 4 or 5 years newer than the Michelin now. But the standard has been set. This tyre was another 5 seconds on. I've run out of words. It felt like a wet race tyre. Honestly, speechless. It was so grippy on the brakes, laterally, on the throttle, everywhere, and it gave you so much confidence. Usually, or sometimes, grip in the wet means really peaky, unfriendly grip, but it was friendly. It allowed you just to glide around the lap, pointing the car exactly where you want. It would go, and then when it was sliding, it was no big deal, one-handed recovery kind of thing. Fantastic tyre. I don't think a tyre that works this well in the wet ever works that well in the dry. I'm a little bit worried that Continental have put all their eggs in the wet handling basket, which has been done before by tyre companies. I really hope they haven't, but I guess there's only one way to find out, and that's to go and do some dry handling, which I think is going to be pretty fun in this car. If I hadn't mentioned it, this Toyota Z4 is actually a lot of fun.
Wet braking confirmed what we found during wet handling. That is, the new Continental SportContact 7 is in a league of its own in terms of wet grip, with the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S and Bridgestone Potenza Sport the best of the rest. Aquaplaning did mix up the order. You can find the full details of all the wet testing on tyre-reviews.com. Now, let's find out if the Continental can continue its mega performance in the dry.
Dry handling, conversely, is quite a short course here, and while it perhaps isn't the most fun for a driver, because it's all really long, high-speed, sweeping corners, it does give you an excellent overview of exactly how the tyres are laterally and how they feel at the limit, because you can just play with the car at the limit on these really high-speed long corners. You can give it a little bit of throttle, you can let it tuck the nose, you can get a little bit of a drift going if you really want to, and you can just discover a lot about the tyres, which you'll be happy to know, or sad maybe, it gives me a lot to talk about again. The slowest tyres on test were this time the mixed budget pair, which perhaps isn't surprising, but you might find it interesting that the balance of grip had totally swapped. Where it was all understeer in the wet, this time it was all oversteer. At the front axle, the start performance on the front axle, it just bobbled and bounced around, and then the rear, if you tried to deal with some of the bouncing or whatever was going on, the rear would just go yeet, and you'd be in trouble. Like, just don't, anything, like any car, don't buy budget tyres. They're usually pretty terrible, especially if you're driving something fun. And I know you'll be saying, John, no one puts budget tyres on their car like this. Come to the UK. I promise you, I've seen 2-year-old M4s with the cheapest tyres in the world on the back and premiums on the front, so that's just going to be a nightmare in the wet. Next place was Federal. Now, the Federal, nothing nice about it again. I'm not sure what's going on with this tyre. It was probably as hard to drive as the mixed budget pair. There was buckets of understeer, and if you tried to neutralise it with a bit of throttle to make it oversteery, just no. But on the same time, essentially, just a fraction different, was the Nankang. And although they were the same times, they delivered it in completely different ways. Once again, the Nankang was like a big puppy dog. It was really friendly, but the front axle was merely a suggestion of where you wanted to go. You would turn in and almost instantly you'd be on the throttle, you'd be sideways, but it was super progressive, super friendly, and just joyful. Like, I'm not recommending this tyre based on the grip, but people consistently ask me, Jonathan, I want to learn to drift, what's a good tyre to do it on? And I don't normally have an answer, but now I do. Buy the Nankang. This tyre is we actually used it for some filming laps earlier in the day, and we were sideways a lot, and it took a lot of abuse. So well done, Nankang. You're not the fastest, and you're definitely not the most sporty of the group, but you've had good wet performance, and the dry performance is fun in maybe a not so grippy way. Kumo and Vredstein were the next two tyres. Now, the Kumo was very tyre-like. It was okay. It was a little bit sporty. I guess like in the wet, you felt like you could drive it a little bit soft maybe for my taste, and the grip once sliding wasn't perhaps the best like in the wet, but it was okay. Okay is okay. Vredstein, on the other hand, as I was warming this up, like doing my weaving and everything, I thought I was going to enjoy this tyre because the steering felt pretty quick and direct. But once you got to the limit, I don't know what went wrong. It wasn't giving me much communication, it certainly wasn't giving a lot of grip, and it didn't have much reserve when you were sliding. Now, we're at the top 4 tyres, and it's so close, they're covered by 1%. In 4th place was the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S. Like in the wet, like in every other test I've driven it, and like I've just said, buckets of grip, especially when braking. I'm not denying Michelin have made a very grippy tyre. However, it just doesn't feel like a sports tyre. The delay on the steering is probably one of the biggest. It's definitely the biggest out of the top 4. So when you steer, you get that annoying weight delay as the tyre feels like it's sitting on a sidewall. Then, the limit of grip when you're sliding around, am I understeering? Am I oversteering? I don't really know. You don't feel it through the steering wheel. You have to wait for your inner ear to like notice the yaw to work out whether you're pushing or whether you're oversteering. And that's just not fun in a car like this. So as always, they've made an excellent tyre in terms of grip, but it's just not the most sporty. The Bridgestone in 3rd, flip it around. That was super sporty. I think it has the quickest steering of the bunch. I know in my previous test it was close, and in this test it's very close, but I think it has some of the best steering. It's probably the quickest, it's the most direct, it gives you good feedback. It does make the car feel a little bit nervous at very high speeds, but I can forgive it. And as before, the grip is outstanding. It needs a bit of warmth, as did the Goodyear ahead of it, but wow, once it's warm up, it just keys and it goes and it goes and it goes. So good work, Bridgestone, on that. It's continuing to show its good performance and good steering feel, but it does have the lowest starting tread depth by a significant margin of the group. It starts at 6.5 mil, and the lower the starting tread depth, the better the steering feels, just by default, because you get less block movement. So I'm not sure if it's a bit of a sneaky one, but that's how it's ended up. And in joint first, and both proving and ruining my theory that a tyre that works well in the wet can't work well in the dry, is the Continental SportContact 7 and the Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport. Now, the Continental was actually technically the faster of the two, but as it was 0.02 of a second, percentage-wise, they're exactly the same. The Continental didn't have the sportiest steering of the top 4. It was better than the Michelin, that's for sure. Wasn't as good as the Bridgestone. Was around the same as the Goodyear, maybe a little bit behind in terms of steering response and speed, but what it did have was the best linearity. So as steering forces build up, you just got the most common sense. It was what your brain expects. Sometimes you steer like the Michelin, then you get like a really sharp after steer, but the Continental was beautiful. It was the most balanced between the two axles. And the grip is just monumental. Felt like it liked a bit of heat, but once it was warm, Jesus, you could just dance around, and it was fantastic. So as a tyre, let me just think about this. A tyre was 5% better in the wet and is essentially one of the best in the dry. Like, I don't know what Conti have done, but they've set a new benchmark just all round. Wow. But I haven't talked about the Goodyear yet. And people quite often ask me, Jonathan, I do a lot of track days, but I don't want to put a track tyre on. What tyre should I fit? And I always, nearly always reply the Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport. And they're like, what? That? Stop being surprised. It is that good on track. This tyre had the best combination of attributes for like a fast road tyre. You could really hustle it around the track. Again, it was another tyre that liked a little bit of heat, as all the top tyres essentially have. But when it was going, it would just go and go and go and go. And you could dance it, you could play with it. There was very little degradation. And super importantly, as I've found on many other tests, we used it again for filming a little bit earlier in the day, like the Nankang, when I was doing the car-to-car stuff. So I probably did 12, 13 laps of really trying to destroy the rear tyres. Came in expecting to see utter disaster on the rear tyres, and they looked fresh. Like, it is the tyre to buy. I get it, it's not the best tyre in the test. It's definitely not won the test. I've not worked out who's won the test, I can guess. It's not won the test because it's definitely lost out in the wet. But if you're looking for a tyre that will take some track abuse and be good on the road, get the Goodyear. It's the most at home of the bunch on track, and I think that's amazing. So now I'm finishing probably off this set of tyres, but it's been worth it. Let's move on to the next part of the test.
As in the wet, the dry braking closely mirrored dry handling. Full noise, comfort and fuel usage data are linked in the description, but if you're solely looking for a quiet and comfortable tyre, the Nankang AS2 is the tyre to have.
This is the part of the video I usually spend about 15 minutes going through all the tyres in great details, but I know I've already talked so much already, so I'll try and keep this as short as possible. If you do want more details after watching, there's a link in the description to the Tyre Reviews website where I break down the results further, and you can see all the data, including the rolling resistance and aquaplaning data, which I've not charted in this video, but it did influence the final order. In last place was the Federal Evolution ST1. It had low noise and okay braking, but the rest of it was a total disaster, and subjectively it was really rough. Skip it, whatever the price. Likewise, the mixed budget pair, understeer, oversteer, I just don't. It ruined what is a pretty fun Z4 and actually made me hate driving it. I always try and include these cheap tyres in my test to highlight the long-term cost of saving a little money at the front. And in emergency wet braking from 100 kilometers an hour, where you'd stopped on the best, you were still doing 46 on the worst. That's the difference between stopping and a mighty crash. Do you get the point yet? Vredstein's Ultrac Vorti Plus finished 8th. It's really time for an update. The Toyo Proxy Sport A was 7th. It wasn't a disaster out on track, but did have long, dry and wet braking, so that hurts the overall results. The Kumo PS71 was 6th and had the best aquaplaning resistance, which probably cost it too much grip in the other tests. It was the same story for the Nankang AS2 Plus. As much as I love driving the Nankang, and as well priced it is, and it has low rolling resistance, it's just not quite there yet in the dry and doesn't feel sporty in any way. But if you must fit a cheap tyre, this is the one. This is a massive improvement over previous years and certainly surprised me. The Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport in 4th is a recommendation of mine, but only if you want a fast road tyre that has amazing steering and is happy on track. It's definitely not a balanced all-round tyre, as it's not the best in the wet anymore, and it's struggled in aquaplaning, so it wouldn't be my first choice for a daily commuter, but then Goodyear has the Asymmetric 5 for that, which is a more balanced tyre. This tyre is a great sports tyre to fit it to your weekend car and just love driving again. The Bridgestone Potenza Sport again performs well, strong in the dry and the wet with super quick sporty steering and short braking. It does give up a little in aquaplaning and certainly wasn't the most comfortable, which could be annoying on the road, but we can forgive it. One concern I do have with this tyre is after testing it twice, it's very high wear on track. I've heard the same for some people on tyre reviews too, so if you're planning track days, just skip this tyre, trust me. The Michelin Pilot Sport 4S is as consistent as ever, finishing 2nd place. I really feel bad being negative about this tyre. I know a lot of people love it, and rightly so. It's a consistent performer in all tests, and it's comfortable on the road. However, it's just no fun compared to the best, so it gets marked down. It can do everything well, apart from make me smile. And finally, the Continental SportContact 7 really does move on the standard by way more than I thought was possible. It somehow combined the best in the dry and the best in the wet, which is almost unheard of, while still being fun to drive. So they must have done something very clever with the compound and construction. It does give up a little aquaplaning performance, so if that's your concern, skip this in the Bridgestone. Otherwise, it's a near flawless performance and an incredible piece of engineering. Congratulations, Continental. Now the new benchmark has been set, it's going to be really exciting to see how Michelin, Goodyear, Pirelli and Hankook respond in the coming years. Any questions, please ask below. Thumbs up, like and subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. And as always, safe motoring.